Vice President of Nigeria, Kashim Shettima, led other dignitaries to honor the nation's fallen and living heroes at the 2025 Armed Forces Celebration and Remembrance Day. The event, which took place at the National Arcade in Abuja, is the climax of activities for this year's celebration. Arise Defense correspondent Ferdinand Duroha has this report.
Initially commemorated on the 11th day of January to coincide with the end of the First World War, the Armed Forces Remembrance Day is now observed in Nigeria on the 15th of January annually to commemorate the end of the Nigeria Civil War after the surrender of the Biafran Army. This year, the hierarchy of the armed forces has called for celebrations of heroism of personnel in active service alongside of tributes to its fallen heroes. Although the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is absent, attending the function outside the country, he is represented by his Vice President, Kashim Shettima. The celebrations, however, retains all its traditional features. Prayers for the repose and a minute's silence in honor of fallen heroes, laying of wreaths, firing of volleys, the last post, ceremonial release of pigeons, signing of the anniversary register, and military drills accompanied by tunes performed by the Armed Forces Band. Some dignitaries speak on the significance of the event.
The fallen heroes who fought First and Second World War during the Civil War, operation under United Nations, African Union, ECOMOG, and then internal security operation that were still ongoing. So all those who participated and all those who could not come back but make the supreme sacrifice, this day is set aside to remember them and to appreciate
the Deputy President, who are taking upon ourselves to be the voice of the widows and to cater for them. And I believe the government should look towards our side and make more help available to the widows.
Loretta is the daughter of a fallen hero. She tells us of her resolve to be part of the tributes to her late father and others who paid the supreme price in the line of duty.
This is also a moment for us to retrospect and to reminisce the wonderful memories of strength, of courage, fighting for justice, fairness, fighting for country, for the love of country, and also seeing how we pay those values, pay those courage, pay it forward, and continue to live up to as patriots of our country, Nigeria.
Now, beyond the annual rituals of remembering the sacrifices of servicemen and fallen heroes, the armed forces hierarchy have been called upon to de-escalate the insecurity in the land and ensure that all issues of insecurity are brought to an end. From the National Arcade, Ferdinand Duroha, Arise News.
Well, thank you very much, Ferdinand, for that report. Yesterday, we had dipped in, going in to see the live ceremony going on in Abuja, led by the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, who was representing the President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who, as we all know, is away in Abu Dhabi. Interestingly, he had given a speech at that Sustainability Forum seminar conference, and we took it live as well yesterday. But let me talk about Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Ferdinand has done a fine job telling us, the history and why it started. The remembrance used to be on the 11th of November alongside other Commonwealth countries. The United Kingdom, other Commonwealth countries celebrate Armed Forces Remembrance Day on the 11th of November. However, following the end of the Civil War, Nigeria then evolved to making the 15th of January, coinciding with the day the Civil War ended in Nigeria, to remember our armed forces, our fallen heroes in Nigeria. The first thing I'd like to say this morning is that not just at the center, that is the federal government celebrating our fallen heroes, but across the states in Nigeria, we have statements from different governors and subnationals who have paid tribute to soldiers and fallen heroes who have paid the ultimate price in the course of serving the nation nation and protecting the integrity of the nation, protecting our borders. However, I want to say something, and that is when you look at the picture, the faces of real people who are affected by the deaths of soldiers, including their immediate family members. We saw Loretta just a few minutes ago who was talking, and I like that she still remained optimistic, talking about how we must continue to remember the legacies that people like her dad paid, by paying the ultimate price for Nigeria, the widow that we saw earlier on. And whilst the 15th of January is a great day for the presidency, for the army, for the military, for subnationals to make grand promises and make grand speeches about how they are going to continue to look after the family members of soldiers and be committed to ensuring that their welfare is priority. What happens is usually that the promises are not followed through. And I say this because when you speak to a number of people, and there's so many littered, I won't bore you with many of the statements made by the subnationals. Well, not boring you, but I won't go and reiterate. We have most of the papers covering it, and maybe during newspaper review with Adefemi, we might have some opportunity to review what some of them said. It's the fact that some of these promises are empty. And following the 15th of January, not a lot is done to secure or ensure the welfare of our fallen heroes. So this morning, I want to really take some time to highlight the predicament of families and members who have been left behind by these heroes who died in the course of service and active service. And some of them 30 years later, 20 years later, saying that the war hero benefits have not been paid, their widow benefits have not been paid, they've not been looked after, they are left in penury. And in fact, some have said that they vowed that none of their family members would join the military, would join the army. And it's quite an indictment on us as a nation. We cannot just pay lip service or have elaborate ceremonies for our fallen soldiers or fallen heroes without actually putting our money where our mouth is, which is ensuring that we go the extra mile to ensure that those that they have left behind also as a signal and to boost the morale of those who are still serving, that we will look after you. We will take care of your family. Even if anything happens, unfortunately, your people are secure. The governor of Kogi State, Usman Ododo, in his promise, had said that he was going to enroll some of the widows and their family members, in the National Health Insurance Scheme. That's a very good and laudable initiative. But a lot of them spoke about promises, what we will. It will be great on the 15th of January to reflect on what has been done and what will continue to be done so that we can really and truly honor our soldiers. The ceremony is fantastic, it's beautiful, but beyond the ceremony, it is the action. We often complain about the welfare of military personnel, whether living or those who have passed on, and what we do for their family members, and it's not anywhere near enough. I was sharing my experience of speaking to a soldier, a military person in the United States, and how when you hear the benefits and how they respect them. 11th, I was in the United States, so I got to witness Veterans Day in the US, and it was a big deal. In some states, there was even a public holiday called, and they said anywhere you see a military man, people would horn and celebrate them. The government led, but the people took inspiration from the government. Many places they get discounts, in stores. They are respected and they are honored. And he said it makes it easy for him to be willing to almost, to lay down his life for a country like this that would honor. He's Nigerian, by the way, who's gone to serve the U.S. military. To serve the military because he knows to what extent. I just wanted to make that case that it's about time that we started to really, really do enough for our fallen heroes and military personnel.
Absolutely, Ayo, very well said. For me, when I think of Armed Forces Remembrance Day in Nigeria and all around the world, I always go back to that famous poem by Wilfred Owen, where he said, "Dulce et decorum est pro mi patria more." It is a sweet and noble thing to die from one's country. When you unpack this very powerful quote, to me, there are several themes that it encompasses that we need to reflect on. Beyond some of the conversations we have, there are deeper conversations to be had. Of course, the most important one is that of sacrifice. The sacrifice of our soldiers is not just with the price they pay with their lives on the battlefield. Even their livelihoods. Joining the military changes who you are as a person, your psychology, the way you operate. So their families as well, those who still have them present, can tell you about the psychological impact, the way their lives are impacted just by service. So there was that very, that's why it was important for me, yes, to see that the wreaths were laid, there were ceremonies and so forth. But now if you look at the other part of this quote, which said, it is a sweet and noble thing to die for one's country, you now ask yourself, you look around and you say, how many Nigerians are ready to die for Nigeria? Where are we getting it wrong? Where do we need to go back to the foundation to rebuild the foundation of patriotism? And it comes down to nation building. Are we building the nation of our dreams? Are we really coming together at the government level and even at the level of the office of the citizen? How much are we really doing to ensure that we fight for this country called Nigeria, no longer on the battlefield, because we thank God that we are in a time of war. But of course, there are constitutional ways that we can always push and bargain for better for the country. And I think for me, Armed Forces Day is just a remembrance of the fact that we need to continue to pursue the country that we are all willing to die for, but by God's grace, we will never have to die for. You know, we speak of Nigeria happening to people. So it's not just the armed forces at this point who are dying for Nigeria. Citizens are dying in various situations, preventable situations, all of which can be prevented by nation building, by accountability from our leaders, and also from us continuing to put pressure for accountability from as citizens. Now, my last point is the point of nation building, which is that, of course, this date of January 15th was chosen because it marked the end of the Nigerian Civil War. And this is very important because we can't speak of the context of the First World War and the Second World War and so forth, because those wars went through their process. The wars ended and there was truth, there was reconciliation, there was reintegration, there was reconstruction. So yes, as much as in 1970, General Gowon made that speech about no victor, no vanquished, I think Armed Forces Remembrance Day is also a day for us to go back and say, as the Nigerian Civil War ended, have we truly seen a process of truth and reconciliation, reintegration, and reconstruction? And where can we go back to the foundation so that we can all come together to build a Nigeria that we are ready to die for, but by God's grace, we'll never have to. Now, joining us for the World Brief and to review some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsonya. Good morning, Adefems, live from London.
Morning. Morning, Vimbai. Good morning to you, Ayo. Hope you're both doing well. Let me tell you what is happening around the world. So happy to hear from you both. Now, essentially, the good news is that war could soon be over in Gaza. That's after a historic ceasefire agreement was reached between Israel and Hamas, which is believed to hopefully end 15 months of all-out war in Gaza, a war that has killed nearly 50,000 people and has threatened to draw in all of the Middle East. Now, this hostage deal, this truce, has been reached largely due to the negotiation and leadership of the Qatari Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, who, along with Qatar, has played a leading role in negotiations up until this point. It's not just Qatar. Of course, we do know the United States and France have all played a leading role. Other countries, Egypt too, playing their role in trying to reach this historic ceasefire deal. Now, this ceasefire is expected to come into effect this Sunday, the 19th of January, and that is pending, of course, all I's being dotted and all T's being crossed. But this ceasefire deal does break down into 3 phases. Let's take a look at those phases. We start with phase 1, and essentially what we are seeing with phase 1 is that the truce, the ceasefire will literally last 6 weeks. This first phase will last 6 weeks and will involve a limited prisoner exchange, the partial withdrawal of Israeli troops in Gaza, and a surge of aid into the region. In addition to that, 33 Israeli captives, including women, children, and civilians over the age of 50 who were taken during the Hamas attack in Israel on the 7th of October 2023, will all be released. In exchange, Israel will release a larger number of Palestinian prisoners during this phase, including prisoners who are serving life sentences. Now, among the Palestinians who are going to be released, there will be 1,000 who were detained after October 7th, 2023. If we look now at stage 2 of this ceasefire, in tandem with the exchange of captives, Israel has also agreed to withdraw its forces from Gaza's population centers to areas no more than 700 meters inside Gaza's border with Israel. So they will still be over Gaza's side of the border, but no more than 700 meters away from population centers. Israel will also allow wounded Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip for treatment and reopen the Rafah crossing with Egypt 7 days after the start of the implementation of phase 1. And finally, if we take a look at phase 3 of this ceasefire deal, the final stage of this deal should see a return of the bodies, the remains of Israeli hostages who were killed, as well as Palestinian fighters, as well as the reconstruction of Gaza, which, as you can imagine, should take years, if not decades. Now, that is certainly something that is representing a huge achievement for many people around the world, notably to US President Joe Biden, who spoke yesterday about how this is a result of his administration's foreign policy prowess, how he talked about the different stages of this war, how the United States had rendered a lot of assistance to Israel militarily, and also looking at how the Middle East could now be more stable. Of course, we know Joe Biden is coming to the end of his presidency, just days left now, and this ceasefire deal is definitely something that he can add to the badge of achievements looking at his own presidency. Now, if we move on now to the Senate confirmation hearings, which are still taking place in the United States, this time it was the turn of Pam Bondi, who is President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General, as well as Marco Rubio. Now, with Pam Bondi, as I said, she spoke to senators yesterday and was spoken to. I mean, these are all grillings, isn't it? They're never going to be the most positive interactions sitting in front of senators, but she was asked about whether or not the Department of Justice under her watch would have a so-called enemies list, and she said that that would not be the case, that this was a topic that was brought up by Trump's pick for the FBI, and she will not be going into the position having a vendetta or a so-called enemies list in any type of situation. She also talked and reiterated her stance on being pro-life, but how that won't impact her decisions when it comes to reproductive rights. So very, very interesting times ahead. And as we said, Marco Rubio, who is going to be Trump's pick for Secretary of State, essentially the foreign policy guy, and he talked about how he doesn't agree, and he criticized the ICC's judgment and issuing of an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which shouldn't come as a surprise. The United States has continued to be an ally of Israel's, especially during this war with Gaza, and looking at the diplomatic relations between the two countries. Now, from one inauguration, we are of course looking ahead to the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump on Monday. There is also an inauguration that took place in Mozambique yesterday. 47-year-old Daniel Chapo of Mozambique, of the Frelimo party, was sworn in a somewhat subdued and low-key ceremony that took place in the Mozambican capital Maputo yesterday. And this is obviously largely due to the post-election violence that we are seeing, the deadly violence that has ravaged through the capital of Mozambique and different areas of the country ever since he was sworn in, especially due to the accusations of impropriety, of vote rigging. And you do have, of course, his opponent Mondlane still coming back into the country just over a week or so ago and declaring himself president-elect, despite Mozambique's Supreme Court reiterating that it was in fact Daniel Chapo who won this election. But as you can see, those are our stories from around the world today. Love to hear your thoughts before we move on to the papers.
Thank you so much, Adefemi. Of course, big news concerning the ceasefire deal, but as they always say, the devil is really in the detail. So what are the details? Ultimately, Israel is yet to officially agree to this deal. It will go to a vote on Thursday, today, and from then we'll have the official position. It's likely that it will pass. But in a bigger sense of it, a lot of people are saying that, well, it's just it's a stopgap. It's not a permanent solution, because of course it is a 6-week week window. However, it's an important move because it will diffuse tensions in the Middle East, because we know that by now Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran have all been sucked in. Yemen as well have all been sucked in. However, it will be interesting to see what their response to the ceasefire deal will be, especially Syria, who have undergone a change in administration, a drastic change in administration. But the one thing they have not been able to agree on is who is going to govern Gaza, because of course the Israelis do not want any Hamas involvement in the governance of Gaza, and of course the Palestinians do not want any Israelis involved. So it still takes us back to that 50-year debate about the two-state solution and whether we'll ever get there. Now, of course, another part of this conversation was all about who takes the credit. Now, some people are saying, a journalist did ask Joe Biden, and he thought it was a joke. He said, is that a joke? Ultimately, I think the truth is that this is a joint responsibility, a joint effort that both administrations can take credit for, just in a similar way to historically. It's almost poetic, because if you remember, Jimmy Carter was also able to release the hostages from Tehran just as he was handing over to the Ronald Reagan administration. So a lot of people are saying it's poetic in that sense, because we know that Donald Trump's defense team member, Mr. Whitcock, has been a very central part. He's been appointed, or he will be appointed, as a Middle East envoy in the Trump administration. So I think it's also a great time for both sides to come together and acknowledge that this was a joint effort between the incoming Trump administration and the Biden administration.
Well, Israel is saying that they did call Trump first yesterday after the announcement of the ceasefire, and really talked up Donald Trump's involvement or his influence in reaching a ceasefire deal, and afterwards calling outgoing President Joe Biden on that one. So there's still that political conversation as to who will take the credit. But the most important thing this morning, and for a lot of people, especially in that region, is finally perhaps an end to this conflict that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. You know, on investigation, in terms of speaking to some of the people on ground, there was celebration, chanting, jubilation on the streets of Palestine as they were rejoicing that finally some of them can now go to bed without that fear of what's going to happen in the next morning. The same thing on the side of Israel. So in terms of that way, a huge sigh of relief. However, we're saying don't hold your breath too long, because it's a very, very fragile agreement. You've taken us through the 3 stages of the ceasefire agreement. However, what's very important is what would happen, especially at stage 1. Are they going to be able to, both sides going to be able to keep to the end of the bargain for the first 42 days? That would determine just how successful this ceasefire will be. So it's not yet uhuru yet. Yes, it's great news. We're seeing perhaps the end of this war that started since the 7th of October 2023, but a lot of effort on both sides and a keeping to the terms of the agreement would mean a lot for how far this will go. As already been highlighted, this does not mean the end of conflict in both areas, and that's what the bigger conversation, at least after the cessation of hostilities between both sides, will be. Also, for Daniel Chapo of Mozambique, I think it's important to mention that his swearing in or inauguration hasn't come without violence. There were protests across the people who had dissented to his emerging as president. 9 people reportedly have been killed yesterday. In total, 300 people have lost their lives since the elections, even though in his speech he had said that he was going to unite the people. We'll see how that would happen. His election or his swearing in has extended the Frelimo party's rule in Mozambique for 50 years, 49 years going on 50 years. So just to see the complexities of African democracies and to see how we're not yet quite there yet when it comes to leadership, rule of law, the will of the people, and having to ensure that people don't have to die when an election takes place. You can disagree, but can we have credible, fair elections where the will of the people actually is supreme?
Yes. Indeed, that is definitely the question many people across the African continent are asking when it comes to election time. Thank you both for your great analysis. Let's move on to the newspapers this morning. And as ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. Now, if we take a look at it, This Day does lead this morning with the 2025 budget. The National Assembly has proposed a 25 trillion naira revenue target for the FIRS, that's the Federal Inland Revenue Service. This Day also features pictures of Vice President Kashim Shettima laying a wreath for the fallen heroes at the Armed Forces Remembrance Ceremony yesterday. Now, the pictures of the Armed Force Remembrance Ceremony plaster through all Nigerian papers this morning, many of which recount the experiences of the families of fallen heroes who say that essentially they have not been taken care of, they haven't been looked after. And while this is budget time and you have the Defense Ministry saying that the proposed allocation is not enough money for them, whatever money does eventually make its way to the Defense Ministry, it should be trickling down to the families of fallen heroes beyond and more than these ceremonies. But moving on now, and the New Telegraph this morning reports on some good news for telcos. The NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission, has directed telcos, which is telecommunication companies, to disconnect the USSD service data codes assigned to 9 different banks due to, of course, this unpaid 200 billion naira debt. The banks clearly have it, because we report extensively on their bottom line, so it'll be interesting to see if they do finally take that step to pay this money. Moving on now to the front page of The Guardian this morning, and a report on the Nigerians in the Diaspora Commission describing the proposal of a $500 tourism tax for Nigerians in the diaspora returning home during the festive Dirty December period is ill-advised and potentially exploitative. NIDCOM essentially believes that it would rather discourage than encourage many Nigerians planning to come home. And that is because we already see that a lot of people come to Nigeria for Dirty December, and the remittances for 2024 alone show that they were the highest so far in the economy. You remember Reuters did a great graphic breaking down for Lagos State specifically how much money came into the country during Dirty December. So NIDCOM said there's no need for a $500 tax, that if anything, it could be counterproductive. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Moving on to The Punch, and The Punch leads with fears of further hardship triggered by this 34.8% inflation rate. The NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, says the surge in inflation is due to the high demand for goods and services during the festive period. Let's not forget that the presidency does believe that it can cut inflation by 50% to 15%. We wait and see for that magic trick, but hey. Now, The Punch also reports, unfortunately, on the death of House of Representatives Deputy Chief Whip Adewumi Ononuga following a brief illness. We do share our deepest condolences. The Daily Trust and the Daily Sun this morning, they both focus on the Emir of Kano, Mohammed Sanusi II, who says that he will no longer offer any assistance to President Bola Tinubu's federal government on how to tackle the economic challenges facing the country. We do know that he is a former central bank governor and lauded as a genius when it comes to macroeconomics, and clearly would have some valid points, but he says, we do quote, that he does not want to help this government, that though they are his friends, if they don't behave like friends, he won't behave like a friend either. So those are your Nigerian papers this morning. A big reference on those issues. Love to hear your thoughts.
All right, thank you so much, Adefemi. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I was going to highlight again, because I'd mentioned during the newspapers, I was going to highlight it during the newspaper review, the front page of the Guardian newspaper, which spotlights and interviews some of the widows of our fallen heroes, and what they've said have been empty promises by governors and leaders. In fact, one of the ladies or the women who spoke was from the wives of the fallen heroes in Lagos State, who said that over the years, a lot of promises have been made, nothing happened. A 76-year-old retiree had said that he cannot let his children join the army. So, a number of things. And just also to highlight the fact that the president wasn't there. I understand, yes, he has responsibilities and he had to attend that conference in Abu Dhabi. However, as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, I would have expected, as a show of solidarity with the people that he is, and he oversees, that he would have been, would have made a really strong position to have seen him, there himself at the ceremonies. But there we go. That's what we see. But thank you so much for your time with us today. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.